And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. It is the best day of the week. And not just because the weekend is almost here. It is also the day that the Heartland Institute streams this here broadcast called The Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the Vice President of the Heartland Institute and your host for today. There is nothing else, anywhere, streaming anywhere on any platform quite like The Climate Realism Show. So that I hope you will help us out by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel, and leave your comments under the video. We do read them, and we do enjoy the engagement very much. All of these very simple tasks are important because they help convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon this program. That way it gets in front of even more people. And a reminder here, because big tech and the legacy media do not approve of the way that we cover climate and energy policy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I really hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS, which stands for the Climate Realism Show. And you can help make sure that this program keeps happening every single week. Any support you can give us is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. And before we get started, we also want to thank our streaming partners for this show: junkscience.com, CFACT, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and our newest streaming partner, the CO2 Coalition. All right, let's get started. We have a really great show today and a very special guest. But we have with us our usual crew: Anthony Watts, he's Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the most influential climate website in the world, What's Up With That. We have H. Sterling Burnett. He's the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute, and Linnea Lukin, Research Fellow for Energy and Environment Policy at Heartland. And we are so happy to welcome to the show for the very first time, and certainly not the last, our friend Tom Harris. Tom is the Executive Director of the Canada-based International Climate Science Coalition. He has presented at several of Heartland's 15 international conferences on climate change over the years, and is among the best communicators in the world on the topic of climate realism. Like many on our side of this debate, Tom took a closer look at the data and woke up to the fact that climate alarmists were wrong. And climate realism is not just makes more sense in common sense, but the data says it as well. Welcome, Tom, and welcome, everybody.
Hey, thank you.
Anthony, before we get started, just before we went live to air, you had mentioned something, a little bit of a breaking news that, maybe it'll help this show and climate realism down the line. But why don't you share that with everybody? It's pretty cool.
Well, as you know, both What's Up With That and Climate Realism and the Heartland Institute's websites have been evaluated by an outfit called NewsGuard. And there's a guy there by the name of Zach who has written to both of us and asked us to answer questions. And of course, when you go down that path, and I've written about this a couple of times, you answer the questions and then they just ignore the questions and they give you a nasty rating saying, that this website is not suitable, it just has falsehoods and all this other stuff. We try very hard to be very factual on What's Up With That, as well as on climate realism. And, we have people look at this to make sure we're factual, but, that's not good enough for some people, apparently. So coincidentally, I sent Zach a notice yesterday on email saying, hey, Zach, guess what? Doge is coming for you. and today, we got a message on Twitter that said that Microsoft is dumping NewsGuard. Boom.
Yeah, it looks like the army of fake fact checkers is getting pushed back, and maybe just kind of dissolving or breaking apart like those terracotta armies that the in China. They're not real. They are fake, and that's such great news that made me smile right at the top of the show. So we'll have to keep an eye on that.
It was a happy day for me when I saw that.
Yes. The good work of Doge just continues. It's actually quite remarkable. I mentioned. So we do this Climate Realism show on Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And on Thursdays, we do the In the Tank podcast from the Heartland Institute. Same day, but just on Thursdays. And all the good news that's been coming out of this administration, and we're not even through 1 month yet. It reminded me of that, I forget the name of the song, by Sade. Some of you old enough to remember pop music from the 80s. There's a line in one of her songs that says, "Every day is Christmas, and every night is New Year's Eve." And that's what it feels like right now with what's going on. And it's really hard to keep up with it. So speaking of that, let's just go right to it because we do have a lot to talk about here. And we always like to start the show with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. All right. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. This first item we have for today, I've titled Cafe Latte because it's about cafe standards and they might be going bye-bye about as quickly as you can drink a latte at Starbucks. This is from our friends at Ace of Spades HQ and Buck Throckmorton, who actually covered our last climate conference last year. He says here, buried amidst all the headlines and executive orders this past week was a major announcement that is decades overdue. The first act of the newly sworn-in Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, was an order for his department to rescind or replace all existing automotive corporate average fuel economy or CAFE standards. The CAFE regulations have been a destructive market-distorting imposition onto the auto industry with various unintended consequences, from pushing consumers out of wagons and into SUVs to killing off small pickup trucks. The intent of CAFE, of course, was initially to deny consumers the right to drive anything but tiny little econo boxes, and has been morphed into an effort to push consumers into electric vehicles. And that's true, what Buck wrote there. I mean, our corrupt media says there's no EV mandate. There's just a swarm of regulations, including, but not just exclusively, CAFE, that makes it so that no other car meets those regulations. And so America's kind of done now with that and being lied to by the legacy media. There's a link in that post by Buck from Automotive News that explains that the CAFE standards require a 2% improvement in fuel economy every year between 2027 and 2031, which would push the average which would push the average to 50.4 miles per gallon, which is absurd. And so Duffy said, we're not going to do that. we're going to at least suspend them and maybe reverse them and
We'd
maybe
be
get
driving
rid of them.
paper mache automobiles.
Yeah, I know, right? How much lighter can they get? And the lighter they get, the less safe they are. But I'll start with you, Anthony. I mean, I think this is good news, obviously, for anybody who wants the freedom to select the vehicle they want for their own needs instead of the bureaucrats selecting their vehicles. So, maybe Congress can pass a bill getting the Department of Transportation out of the vehicle efficiency mandate business forever.
That would be great. But, I will say that better mileage does, in fact, help everyone. But there's a point of diminishing returns. And I think we've already reached that. For example, I had a vehicle that I've since gotten rid of that had some plastic parts on the engine that would not be on a normal engine, like a 350 Chevy small block. And the plastic parts melted, right? So what the hell? It was to get a little bit of extra lightness, but they didn't think it through. The testing wasn't perfect and so forth. And, I ended up with melted engine parts because they were trying to meet these CAFE standards and, put in lighter components. And it's the same thing with safety. If you're going to put in plastic, well, plastic shatters rather than crunches and absorbs impact. So it's all very problematic. And I'm very, very happy that CAFE is on the way out.
Tom, what kind of car do you drive? I mean, we've known each other a long time. You're a bit of a former hippie, maybe still a hippie, just not a left.
Oh, no, I have a Dodge Grand Caravan because I pull a trailer. So I use a huge amount of gasoline, and that's fine with me. I'm paying a lot of carbon tax up here, of course. And,
By the way, Tom's Dodge Grand Caravan was a creation of the CAFE standards. There was nothing called a minivan when they first implemented CAFE standards, and there were things called station wagons. And when they imposed CAFE standards, station wagons largely disappeared, but a new class of vehicles arose: minivans.
Huh. Wow.
And they were listed as light trucks, so they weren't held to the same standard. The minivans would not exist. There were large vans, but there weren't minivans before CAFE. I'm not sure what Anthony meant when he says CAFE helps everybody.
No, I said better mileage helps everybody. Not CAFE.
If you don't care about mileage, then it doesn't help you. I mean, that's not a feature I look at. When I go look for a car, I don't look at the EPA's mileage thing. I want comfort. I want power. Fuel economy doesn't figure in. So it means nothing to me.
Yeah.
And if I don't care about it, then it doesn't help me. It's like saying we got somebody traded to a team that I don't care about. It doesn't help me if we got a new player, if I don't care about that team. So anyway, but I just say this. CAFE has killed a lot of people. More people died from the lightning of cars due to the CAFE standards than died in Vietnam. Than soldiers died in Vietnam. They kill for every 100 pounds shaved from a car, something like 700 people die or more every year in accidents from the lightning of cars. Now, unfortunately, I'm not convinced that the NTA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's going back on their CAFE standards, if they even scrapped it entirely, gets us completely off the SNI with regard to fuel efficiency and the electric vehicle mandate, because the other driving force for it is a backdoor driving force, which is the emission standards that the EPA imposes. You remember, the electric vehicle mandate was not a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration standard. It was an EPA mandate that you had to reduce emissions from vehicles to a certain level, which left it the case that only 2/3 of the vehicles were going to have to be electric vehicles by 2030. That's the mandate, and I haven't seen that go away. Hopefully, Zelding will get to that. There's an EO on it. Hopefully, they'll withdraw the California waiver. That's going to also be necessary to finally kill fuel economy as a concern. But so they have to all work together. This is a good first start.
Yeah, well, it's my hope that we end up with instead of CAFE standards, we have buffet standards, so that anybody can buy a car of any kind.
Exactly.
Yeah. I should just tell you some of the stats on how much I pay in carbon tax. Right now, there's 17.6 cents per liter whenever I fill up my tank with gasoline, and my tank is a 20-gallon tank, so it costs me $13.37 in carbon tax. But believe it or not, they put HST, which is a new kind of tax, on top of the tax, so it's doubly taxed. So every time I fill up my Dodge Grand Caravan, I'm paying over $15 in tax. And by 2030, if we keep our liberal government, I'll be paying $32 in carbon tax every time I fill up my Dodge Grand Caravan. So that's, of course, why we want to get rid of the liberal government.
Thank you for your sacrifices and saving the earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, don't worry, Tom. Once we take over Canada as the 51st state, maybe they'll take Ontario. Or I mean, I think we're really only interested in Alberta and Saskatchewan because Alberta has all the oil and Saskatchewan is fine to stay. But Quebec and Ontario, you're still
on Yeah, well, there's a lot of people in Alberta would love to join the United States. Sorry. Yeah, Amazon.com is actually selling T-shirts and other paraphernalia with Canada the 21st state or 51st state. And there's a lot of Canadians who would love to join the US, because you have a stronger economy, lower tax, all sorts of benefits. And then we don't have to freeze up here. We could actually move south.
Well,
There
you
are,
know,
there,
you
are a
can always
couple other
immigrate.
provinces, there are a couple other provinces I wouldn't mind having because they have good hunting there.
Yeah.
That is true. That is
And
true.
Quebec then can be their own separate society.
Yes, and we have here, we're going to move to our second item here in the crazy climate news, but we just asked if Tom Harris is the same Tom Harris who used to partner with Jay Lair on their own podcast, and the late, great Jay Lair, who was the longtime science director at the Heartland Institute. And I know Jay was a good friend of yours, Tom.
Yeah.
You still do that podcast, just not with Jay anymore.
That's right. We have Todd Royal as my co-host. He's an energy policy expert from Texas. And actually, we had Sterling on just last week. Sterling and Todd, both from Texas, both in nice climate where I'm here at minus 20.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, that's right. So, this is actually the earliest that the outdoor skating has started in 20 years. So it's obviously global warming that's causing us to be freezing.
Obviously. What's the name of your podcast and how can people find it?
Yeah, if people go to americaoutloud.news and click on podcasts and go down to the other side of the story, and that's ours, because we bring in people who give the other side of the story, usually on climate and energy issues, but sometimes we get into all sorts of things. We even get into DEI and other things. So yeah, it's nice to hear people on the other side of the story.
Yeah, I was on your podcast once. I think I yelled too much and I haven't been invited back. So
No,
I'll try to calm down.
we're gonna have you back, that's for sure.
All right, let's get on to our second item here. This one especially tickled our Linnea Lucan and his infinite sea of rats. This is we got this from the Washington Post via their climate newsletter. And it starts, I'm going to skip into the good part here. It's like, it's hard out there for a rat. During the height of winter, the rodents flee underground or indoors, spending less time foraging for food to feed their young and to grow their numbers. Quote, for a small mammal, it's pretty tough to make your living in the very cold winter months. To assess whether milder temperatures alleviate that winter burden and allow rats to reproduce more, Richardson, this researcher, and his colleagues collected data on rat sightings over a dozen years in cities including Tokyo and Amsterdam. Sightings rose significantly in 11 of the 16 cities analyzed, a result unsurprising to those working in rodent management. Great job. Over the last decade, rat sightings in Washington, D.C. jumped by more than 300%, while in New York City, they went up by 162%, according to Richardson. I think that's fake news. I think that's fake data. There's way more rats in DC, and we're actually spotting them right now. Anyway, here's the money quote.
Let's say I think that they were appropriately counting all the government folks.
Right? Yeah. 300% rise in just four-legged furry rats, but the place is lousy with them. All right, here's the money quote though. Quote: We live in an infinite sea of rats," said Neom Quinn, a human wildlife interactions advisor at the University of California Davidson Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources, who was not involved in the study. About 40% of the overall increase in rat sightings is linked to rising temperatures in cities, according to the analysis. Researchers also found that the more densely populated a city is and the less green space it has, the more urban rats thrive. The research is the first to find a link between climate change and rat populations, said Kaylee Byers, an assistant professor of an urban rat expert at Simon Fraser University in Canada. What a great job. So, I don't know. Linnea, I'm going to go to you first because you saw this and said you couldn't stop laughing the more times you looked at the phrase infinite sea of rats. Infinite, I think infinite might be fake science. I think there might be a limit actually on the number of rats that could actually exist in our universe.
It's just the funniest subheader I've ever seen in an article. I don't know why it tickled me so much, but it really, really does. The second thing in the article that made me laugh out loud while reading the article was that there is an individual in New York City who has the government title of Rat Czar, which sounds like something from like the Nutcracker. It's magnificent. It's beautiful. I would like to say they admit though that they have found that climate change is responsible for 40% of the increase. One, I don't believe that's true. I think that number is more or less made up. But even so, they're saying that the majority of the rat increase is not because of climate change. And I think that everybody who is aware of the state of American cities at this point knows what the real reason is. And that is because our cities' municipal services are falling apart. I mean, I used to, when I was a kid growing up in Illinois, and when we would go to Chicago, I was always impressed with my own city, with how clean it was compared to other cities that I had seen. That is not the case anymore. And I think anyone who lives in New York, especially, or DC, will admit, yeah, there's more rats because there's more trash on the sides of the road. It's obvious what the reason is. It's not, you know, I don't think that Tampa, Florida, or like Jacksonville has more rats than DC, and those places are much warmer. So
I would say there are a couple of other things to take into account, and maybe they did. I don't know. Populations have grown in cities. They attribute densification to a part of the problem, but I would argue that observation is part. First off, this is about they have seen rats.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there are more rats. It means they're seeing more rats. Two different things. Might have as many rats underground as you've ever had. There might have been as many in the past, but we're seeing more. Well, you mean you're looking for them? You're looking for them. Go if you want to test whether climate change is causing more rat populations. Go to rural areas. Check haystacks in barns. Are there more rats there now than there have ever been before?
That would be better study because you have a better control group with that.
That's the point. Instead, you've got people running around the cities counting rats for the study, and they're seeing more than they've ever seen before. Yeah, you weren't counting them before.
Well, they're getting paid for it. I mean, Tom, it's just shameful.
How would you know?
Yeah,
how would you
Tom,
know?
we have an assistant professor. We have an assistant professor, an urban rat expert at Simon Fraser University in Canada. It is just shameful that your country is spending money on such a position.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with Sterling. A lot of this is observational bias, and that's the same with extreme weather. I'll just give you one quick example. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration tracks extreme weather for every state in the Union. And what they show is that in 1936, there were 27 extreme weather records set that still stand today. In 2024, on a statewide basis, there were none. And, it's interesting because people say, but we see it on the news all the time. Yeah, because in Oklahoma 100 years ago, there was nobody with a cell phone, and there were very few people to even see a tornado that hit. Whereas now, everybody sees it because, of course, there's a lot more people and they all have cell phones. So observational bias probably applies in the case of rats, too.
If you want to know about rats and how they do vis-a-vis weather and extremes. So when did the bubonic plague? Because everyone knows at this stage that they were carried by rats, the fleas on rats, and it turns out the last plague, both in China and in Europe, was in the early 1300s, and that was the commencement of the most recent little ice age, which glaciers started to expand in the late 1200s. So it was getting cooler, but rats were more prevalent, with fleas being more prevalent, with disease being more prevalent. Where were the rat census takers then? There was no one counting them. The point is, rats have thrived and survived through ice ages. They've been around for a long time. And there's no evidence in this study that there weren't just as many rats underground 70 years ago as there are today. And really above ground, because no one was counting them back then. It's estimates. And what you know is, as Linnea rightly said, first, there's more people. Those more people are producing more waste, and the cities are doing worse at handling the increased amount of waste, the food stuff in overflowing trash bins. And I'm not talking about in front of your house. I'm talking about the commercial trash bins that build up. And then you have the city strikes, right? Where no one picks up for weeks on end. I think you're going to see a few rats.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, Anthony, why don't you take this this pretty disgusting topic home for us, will you?
Yeah, I got the short straw this week on writing climate realism stories. I ended up having to cover the rat story, and the whole thing that we put on climate realism, basically, that this was fake news. And I pointed out, just as Sterling had and Linnea had, that in order to be able to push their agenda that climate change is causing this, they had to ignore a whole bunch of other stuff, garbage mismanagement, and that's a big problem in big cities right now. Rats thrive on available food sources, and they don't really care about the temperature. They'll go down in the sewers or the steam tunnels or whatever and live down there in a nice warm environment. And then there's regulations that have been put in place because we want to be more humane about killing rats. So rodenticides have been restricted in some cities. So some cities have become rat sanctuary cities. Yes, indeed. And then there was the COVID lockdown. Right? So the COVID lockdown forced people indoors. And so rats no longer had to worry about people outside. And hey, let's go. They basically exploded during the COVID. So, the whole thing is a bunch of ridiculous fake news.
And they also banned rat fights where you'd go pick up rats from the streets and let rat terriers fight them. So, that's caused a rat explosion, right? No one's out there actively removing the rats for sport.
Yeah. Well, let's make rat fighting great again. All right. Moving on. Well, our third crazy climate news item this week, actually, Sterling is the one who picked this out for us this week. I titled it "Going to Climate Church." Now, the World Council of Churches, with churches in the Caribbean and North America, they've used training on climate litigation. Now, this is from the World Council of Churches website. It says the WCC has offered the first in what will be a series of training workshops on climate litigation in partnership with the Caribbean and North American Council for Mission, CANACOM. The WCC led the training through a lens of child protection and our future generations. Jennifer P. Martin, Education Mission Secretary for CANACOM, said all of CANACOM's member churches are located in countries with governments that have a reasonably high awareness of climate change and of the climate chaos into which the world is descending. Quote, most, if not all governments have environment and climate change policies, officers, or agencies. Some work is being done, she said. We're going to skip ahead here and get ready, Sterling, because this might trigger you. The World Council of Churches has for decades been calling for climate action and climate justice. But climate litigation is a new area for the WCC. Quote, it was the children from our churches who asked us to take this new route of climate litigation, which is new for the WCC and is the only way that really gives solid hope for children in the face of what science tells us about the climate emergency, she said, unquote. Harsh Narula, a lawyer specializing in climate law and litigation, gave an overview during the training on how legal action can work to try to address the climate crisis. He noted that 75% of climate cases in 2023 were filed by individuals or civil society groups, mostly against governments. But increasingly, cases are being filed against companies involved in the fossil fuel industry. Sterling Burnett, God created the heavens and the earth. So what's wrong with churches leading his flock to spread the good word of climate justice and even taking it into the courts of law?
God, excuse me.
Yes.
He's listening. Go ahead.
Use his name in vain. Where to start? Where to start? First off, it was very clear that humans were to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. And climate policy is Caesar's, folks. Energy use is Caesar's. It ain't the church's. The church is supposed to save souls. It's concerned about life beyond life on earth. They want people to live well, or the Bible admonishes people to live well. It sets out guidelines for them to do so. We were given dominion over the earth. They've changed that to stewardship, but stewardship's not found in the Bible. It was dominion, but we weren't to waste the resource. We were to use them for our enhancement and God's glory. Now, there is no climate crisis. Regardless of what the World Council of Churches says, there's no increasing, there may be increasing awareness because of the media, but there is no actual climate crisis. And it seems to me that church is straying pretty far from its mission, and it wants to go into lawfare. The church is supposed to bring peace about, not war in the courts. And at least in the U.S. courts, these cases are losing. I wonder, just off the top of my head, it occurred to me while you were talking, Jim, how much USAID money has the World Council of Churches received?
I bet a lot.
I'll wager that there's some money going from U.S. taxpayers to the World Council of Churches through USAID, and it's being misspent. It's not clear to me we should be putting any money into the World Council of Churches, but if we are, it's supposed to be spent on helping people get fed, helping people get clothed, maybe helping people get educated, but not suing over climate change. That ain't in their mission. And as far as I can tell, in the Bible, it's nowhere in any church's mission. You know, it takes the hubris is that humans control the climate as opposed to God, setting it in motion and letting it operate. Can we do better or worse? Sure. Is there any evidence that we really are with CO2, that God thinks CO2 is pollutant? None whatsoever. I just think that this is mission creep for the church, trying to be relevant in earthly matters as opposed to its mission of spiritual matters.
Yeah. Tom, you want to weigh in here? You're
yeah, it's interesting. You know, for religious people, you have to look at what nature did long before humans were here, you know, and this is God's handiwork. You look back through the geologic time frame where you find that CO2 was up to 10 times what it is today at times when it was very cold. You know, you go back 440 million years. This is what actually turned me from a climate alarmist to a realist, is I met a geologist at a local university, and he showed me the correlation between carbon dioxide and temperature does not exist in the actual data. And as I say, 440 million years ago, CO2 was not 50% higher, as it has gone since about the last 1880. But in fact, it was 1,000% of today's level. It was 10 times higher. And we were in the coldest period of the last 500 million years, which is about as far back as we can go with accurate measurements or accurate proxy data, actually. But, you know, that's actually something that we introduce in this book. It's co-authored by Sterling Burnett. I'm a contributing author, if you look at the back. But we talk about the geologic history and also other elements of the science. But, you know, people that are religious, God made the earth specifically to be very robust. You know, the whole idea of a fragile earth system would not be very good, would it? And yet they say in the Bible, God made all these things and it was very good. And the only way it would be very good is if it was robust, if it was able to compensate for high levels of CO2 and not run away into a boiling Venus type affair. So yeah, the earth is actually a very robust system. It was designed very well, thanks to God.
Yes.
You know, I just say one more thing about this. You know, the Bible is very clear in warning about false prophets. And one of the things it warns about is those who would worship the creation and not the creator. And churches today are more and more, whether they're led by the children or whether because they are not preaching the word of God accurately, leading the children down the wrong path, they're worshiping creation, folks. They are worshiping the earth above humans and the human soul and God who created all this. They're replacing God in the center of concern with the earth, and that it doesn't get much more unbiblical than that.
Well, the thing about this story that kind of got me was the well, I just don't believe it that oh, we wouldn't have never gotten involved with it. We would have never gotten involved with this if the children of our churches didn't come to us and ask us if we could help stop climate change. I don't believe that for a minute. So you have double exploitation here, exploitation of the fears of children and exploitation of, the liturgy for political purposes.
Yeah, well,
I wouldn't be sorry, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you scare the children to death, then of course they're going to speak out. So the fact that the children are speaking out is because the parents and the church scared them to death. It's not them that are driving it.
Yeah, another option too is, there are a couple of organizations that coordinate those children's lawsuits against states that don't have strong enough anti-fossil fuel legislation or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was an organization like that approached the pretty progressive WCC and got them on board with the litigation effort. But I think that they're going to have a lot harder time in the courts than they have had the last couple of years, and they have been mostly losing in a lot of those cases. I think they're going to continue to lose in those cases. So if they want to waste money on it, it's a shame. It should be going to causes that the church or any of these churches, should be focused on, like Sterling said, like the poor, or cleaning up their local environment if they want to be stewards, right? There's stuff that they could be doing, but they're going to be spending money on this instead. Okay.
Yeah.
If they're working with those groups you talk about, Linnea.
Yeah.
If you're working with those groups that you're talking about, those groups are well in favor of population control. They're working with people who actively want people not to be fruitful and multiply. They want them to diminish population. They embrace China's one-child forced policy. So they are off the rail in so many ways.
I think you should actually blame the parents, blame the church, because it's a form of child abuse to only tell them the bad news, not to show them graphs like this, which is in Sterling's book, the book that he co-authored, and it shows that CO2 and temperature are not correlated. This, to give the kids only bad news and to scare the heck out of them, that is a form of child abuse. So, they're not doing their job as good stewards of children, that's for sure.
Great. Anthony Watts, can you lead the recession for the end of this topic, please?
Yeah, well, I want to say this, that anytime you mix religion and science, it's never worked well. And in this case, not only are they mixing religion and science, they're mixing religion and pseudoscience, which is even worse. And so, the whole idea of a climate church is just ludicrous. But I do want to say there were a couple of commenters who suggested that Sterling might be the new Archbishop of Canterbury, right? But, given how Sterling is on this show, I think he could be the Archbishop of Ranterbury.
There you go.
There we go. I've been waiting to use. I can never get my finger on the rim shot button fast enough, so I don't care if the joke was lame. It's fine. Moving forward. All right. All right. Thanks, guys. That's your crazy climate news for this week, and we only have 3 items. This show is only 1 hour long. If we had all the crazy climate news every week, this show would be 5 hours long. So let's get on to our first. I'm going to share a.
You don't want to do that again, Jim?
Right. Yeah, we did do that on a watch party. So before we move to our main topic, I want to share a meme of the week. We like to do either a meme or a cartoon. This is actually a tweet, or I guess an X post is what Elon Musk wants us to call them. But this is a post from Scott Adams. He's the creator of Dilbert. And he shared a piece by our own Anthony Watts, which on a topic we covered on last week's show. Anthony, on our Climate Realism website, and then also on What's Up With That, had debunked an AP story about European heat deaths that was based on a debunked model and shaky stats. And Scott Adams says, wait until you find out about climate models. And by that, he's meaning that they're all, for the most part, useless as science, and they're not even very persuasive to people who are paying attention. So this is great news, guys. Climate realism is spreading, and it's getting to some pretty influential people out there.
It sure is. And, having Scott Adams retweet that was great, to getting that kind of attention. Scott has been very pragmatic. He initially well, thinking maybe climate change is the real problem. But he read a lot of stuff that I've written and we've written over at Climate Realism and other places. And he's very slowly kind of shifted towards, maybe this isn't such a problem after all. And yeah, he's right. Wait till you see the climate models. The climate models are the thing that all of the scare is predicated on. And despite the fact that the worst climate model ever, RCP 8.5, has been debunked, not just by us, but by real climate scientists saying this is impossible. There's not enough fossil fuel on the planet to burn to meet these scenarios of RCP 8.5. Despite all that, the climate alarmist community continues to use it and cite it because it's scary. And when you say scary things, you motivate people, and that's their whole agenda.
Yeah, and I know you've shared with us in the past, Scott Adams has been pretty up to speed on climate realism and the science for a long time, and he's used his Dilbert cartoon strip to mock climate alarmism, and even drew a version that looks suspiciously like one Dr. Michael E. Mann, and makes fun of him too. So yeah, I should have thought to put some of those up on the screen. Maybe we'll find some for later, but I know we've shown them
more than one with that figure. But also, it's worth mentioning that much like the Climate Realism show, Scott Adams was largely canceled.
That's right. Yep, but he's doing fine. Don't you worry. But he's very influential. He's got a huge following. Actually, it's a very interesting. He does a daily podcast called Coffee with Scott Adams. It's actually, I watch it quite often. It's actually pretty entertaining. Anyway, so let's move on to our main topic here and why we have somebody who is not from the United States on the show this week, but wants to be from the United States. Maybe.
Yeah. Let's join. I want to join.
Yes. Oh yeah. Before we go, here's on the screen. I knew it'd be there. What's up with that? So there's a cartoon. And gosh, that guy looks suspiciously like Michael Mann. But if we say that it definitely is Michael Mann, we might have some litigation against us. So we're just going to leave it to your imagination. All right. So our main topic today is how basically the Trump effect on the global climate agenda. There are so many things happening, and it's happening so fast. It's hard to keep track of all of it. But I just want to lay out a few stories that from the last couple of days that show that Trump effect on the global climate agenda. There was a story in the Daily Beast. There's no need to bring these up on screen. I'll go through them quickly. There's a story on the Daily Beast. Marco Rubio pulls out of the G20 summit over very bad focus on DEI and climate. He said, quote, on X, did Marco Rubio say this? Quote, I will not attend the G20 summit. South Africa is doing some very bad things, expropriating private property, using G20 to promote solidarity, equality, and sustainability. In other words, DEI and climate change. So he's not going, and it is extremely unusual for the Secretary of State of America to not go to a G20 summit. That's a big deal. That is a big, big deal. And again, it's because of DEI and all the climate nonsense. Another story from this week from Wired. NOAA employees are told to pause work with, quote, foreign nationals. An internal email obtained by Wired shows that NOAA workers received orders to pause, quote, all international engagements. And then, of course, there's word that DOJ has walked into the NOAA offices the other day. And so they're going to get down to the business of reducing the staff of NOAA and maybe focusing their mandate on what it's supposed to be, which is weather and not advancing, BS climate alarmist narratives. So we'll see if that happens. And then in Canada, this is for you, Tom. One of the most immediate Trump effects happened almost immediately after his inauguration. The premier of Alberta said she wanted to talk to Trump about getting the Keystone XL pipeline project going again. Now, that project was deader as dead. Deader than dead could be. Very dead. Not just mostly dead. So what's going on up there, Tom? Is the election of Trump changing the way your country is going to, quote unquote, fight climate change and energy policy?
Yes, indeed. He's setting the stage actually for a massive conversion of public opinion. You might remember in one of your climate change conferences that I gave a presentation specifically on what is it that drives public opinion on climate change. And it turns out, according to Yale University study, it's not the science, it's not the media, it's not the events they see around the world. It's the statement of the elite and in particular politicians. So as a consequence of Trump's Trump's very straightforward and outspoken statements, it will shift public opinion, not just in the United States, but in the whole English-speaking world. Anybody who listens to Trump then feels emboldened to say what they really think. And that's really important for people to realize that conservatives in Canada still feel they have to support the climate scare because they say, oh, public opinion is not yet on our side. So they go ahead and they support it with things like carbon sequestration and electric vehicles and moving from coal to natural gas. But what they don't realize is that what they say actually drives public opinion. And people can look this up. If they do a search, Yale and public opinion and climate change, they did a survey across a lot of the US, and they found that it was the statements of politicians that influenced public opinion more than any other single thing. So Trump is actually doing us a massive favor because he is helping shift public opinion and making it politically acceptable to say, hey, I don't think that we're causing a climate crisis. Thank you, President Trump. The influence is very strong here in Canada as well.
That shows you right there, Tom, if that's accurate, if Yale is right, that shows you how badly the hippies of the late 60s, early 70s failed in their admonishment to not trust the man, to question authority, the joke of trust me, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. If people really believe, it's hard to believe in this day and age when you see what our politicians say and you see the lying that they do, and their actions.
Mm-hmm. But you know, in the past, it was not acceptable at a party, for example, to say, I agree with Richard Lindzen from MIT that this whole thing is blown out of proportion. Now it will be much more accepted because Trump is leading the way, and that's why this was produced actually. And by the way, you can order a copy of this at icsc-canada.com, and this is the book that Sterling wrote along with Ron Davidson, and it gives people the facts. Okay, they may feel suspicious about the climate scare. This will give them the facts and figures they need. So yeah, check it out. We're selling it for $22. Canadian bucks, which aren't worth very much, by the way. We're down to about less than 70 cents.
Yeah, you could get it. Oh, yep. About 53 cents, actually, American.
Oh, God, yeah. That's right. The loonie will be pretty worthless.
Yeah. Anthony?
Yeah, well, one of the most satisfying things that I saw this week was on the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA website. On their climate website, over on the right sidebar there, they had this report called Equitable Climate Services Action Plan, whatever the hell that is. Well, I suspected I never read it, but I suspected it's one of those DEI things. And guess what? When you click on the link this week, it's gone. Page not found.
Oh.
Hey.
And as they said in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and there was much rejoicing.
Yes.
Yes.
They're in shambles. I mean, all of those, third, fourth string staffers at these organizations who have been, full bore for the climate scam forever are probably just having the worst couple of weeks of their lives recently. And
Yeah.
I don't feel too bad about it at all.
Well, one thing that's really fun is when I was writing my last article for America Out Loud, I was wondering, how does the homepage of the Department of Energy change? So I went to Wayback Machine, which is the digital archive, and I got a screen capture of what the Department of Energy webpage looked like when Jennifer Grindham was the secretary back in Biden's regime. And I contrasted it with today. And it's quite amazing because they have her, looking really thoughtful in a big solar panel array. And under that, they have climate malarkey misinformation. And you click into it and you see, oh, those things are actually true. But you look at it today, totally changed. It has an oil tanker, and it's just wonderful when you see the contrast. Boom, boom, right side by side.
Of course, a lot of things are going on in Canada, right? Right, Tom? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Even before Trump, it's been a year and a half since I commenced with Friends of Science and Canadians for Sensible Climate Solutions on the booklet. It was just an idea back in October a year ago, right? And at the time, it was believed, I was told that Trudeau was basically an unstoppable force on this. That they were really concerned that we need to get out quick before he started offering all sorts of new climate taxes and climate commitments. And not only did those not come, but Trudeau is no longer an unstoppable force. In fact, he's been stopped and will no longer be prime minister in a very short period of time. Now,
in March.
I'm not saying the climate thing was the only reason for his fall, or even a major reason for his fall. But with his fall, unless who is it? Ed Miliband or
Mark Carney? Oh my God, he's coming! He's coming! Mark. Yeah, actually,
worse. But it's a short-term thing because it looks like in October, the Conservatives, who are what do we call it?
They're the official opposition.
They're the official opposition, but they are I forget what lukewarmers. They're lukewarmers, right?
Yeah.
They're not all in. They're lukewarmers, and even a lukewarmer is better than what you've had and what you're likely to have under Mark Carney.
Yeah, except that from March until perhaps October, we may have Mark Carney. Probably we'll have Mark Carney as prime minister. And Mark Carney, with his WEF connections and all that sort of thing, he's going to be as if Al Gore had become your president. So from March, when they elect or at least, they nominate within the Liberal Party, the new Prime Minister of Canada, because he doesn't have to be elected. He can actually just come in from the outside and bam, he's suddenly the Prime Minister. He could be Prime Minister for half a year, which is March to October, because they have to have the general election by October. So indeed, he could be our Al Gore leading the country. He'll make Trudeau look like a moderate. So yeah, we're going to go through a really, really crazy period with Carney probably as prime minister for half a year before the election. So we don't get out of this, hell very quickly. It's going to be very painful.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think I know that Donald Trump, look, we pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So that obviously has that's probably the most prominent Trump effect on the global climate agenda. I believe the president has ordered his administration to re-examine all foreign entanglements, basically, all foreign treaties and agreements that we have to see whether or not we want to remain in them. And I think I chatted with Anthony about this. To me, that signals that we could perhaps see the United States withdrawing itself from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the so-called UNFCCC. That would be a huge deal. I mean, Paris is one thing, but that would essentially mean the United States is done trying to fight climate change and to stop it and reverse it, and to have all of our policies in every single aspect of what a government can do in the direction of stopping climate change. Do you see that happening? Because that would be an enormous deal. And I can't see the rest of the world deciding that they're going to go forward with it if we were to pull out of the UNFCCC.
Yeah, I agree with what you said there, Jim. And I want to say that one of the tenets that I learned early on from a lot of different people saying the same thing was have the courage to do nothing. Seriously. And if we pull out and do nothing, now watch the climate change, is it going to change for the worse? Probably not. Nothing's going to happen if the United States pulls out. And it's just basically going to be a wash for these other organizations. They're going to lose funding and whatever. And eventually the whole thing is going to wither and die. So I see this as a very strong action. One other point I want to make is that if NOAA is ordered to stop working with foreign nationals, that means, well, maybe places like the Climate Research Unit in England, we're not supposed to be talking to those guys anymore. Remember, those are the guys that started ClimateGate because they were resisting FOIA requests and hiding data. And so, maybe we'll be done with them. Maybe we won't even accept foreign climate data anymore. I mean, the GHCN, the Global Historical Climate Network, is all about data from the rest of the world. So are they going to stop that? I don't know. But you know what? It again goes back to just simply have the courage to do nothing. And I applaud Trump and his people for having that courage.
That's for sure. Yep.
I think unfortunately, because I think we should pull out of the UNFCCC, but I think it's a little optimistic to think that we will do so. Trump's executive order got us out of every climate agreement up to, every climate agreement since the UNFCCC, because they were all agreements. None of them were treaties. But we entered into the UNFCCC as a treaty, and Trump by himself can't get us out of a treaty. It was signed off on by the Senate, and we have to withdraw through the Senate. And I don't think there is an appetite and a large enough group of senators who would be willing to go on the record as doing that. That doesn't mean that Anthony is wrong about we can stay in the UNFCCC and just not participate.
Yeah, well, actually, I had a.
We could be members in name only, and then not show up to any further meetings, or show up like the English used to do when they were part of the EU, and show up to throw in a monkey wrench into all their work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That would be wonderful. I mean, you can defund every UNFCCC program. You can end all of the things that came out of the FCCC. But you still go to the FCC meetings and you say, oh, did you see that we're setting cold weather records here? And, oh, what happened to global warming there? I actually hope the US stays in so that they can go and throw a monkey wrench in the whole thing every time they go. And then other people will be more likely to speak out too. So that's an advantage of them not being able to get out easily.
All right. Well, when the United States takes over Canada and you're an official citizen, Tom Harris, I'll put you up for special ambassador to the UNFCCC.
Yeah, I can go and beat them up. Yeah.
They'll do that Canadian accent and won't know what hit them. They'll be so confused, and we'll get our way.
Oh yeah. Well, when Mark Morano and I went to Copenhagen, we really turned over a lot of tables. They tried to kick us out. It was hilarious because we got into the media center, and oh man, it was so fun.
Great. Well, all right. Thanks, guys. I think that. Terrific topics today. Great coverage. I appreciate everybody. And gosh, our chat is super lively today. In fact, we have a ton of questions, and Linnea is going to walk us through some of those.
Sure. I'm going to take the first question myself that I want to bring up, just to give a really brief little sample of some like petroleum geology, geologic history. We had some questions from this fellow on what happened? Andy, why'd you put that comment up? I had this one from someone on Rumble called Data 12. And he's asking about H2S production in the oil field. H2S is a very, very dangerous gas. It occurs in pretty small amounts in most places, but it can be very deadly. It's not just something that occurs in oil and gas wells. You can also get it out of sewers. You can get it out of basically anything that had any kind of biological matter go into it. And he was mentioning earlier in his question that he's skeptical about species contributing to the production of H2S because there's so many species alive today. How many could have possibly contributed if they went extinct? And one, I don't think it necessarily needs to be a species that went extinct entirely in order to contribute. Most of the organic matter that produces fossil fuels is coming from like algae and swamp environments as their depositional environment. But I do want to point out that all of the species on the entire planet, and I think that includes bacteria and plants and everything, it makes up about 0.01% of all the species that ever lived. The vast majority of species that ever existed on this planet are already extinct. So it's especially when it comes to macrofauna, like animals and stuff that you could actually find fossil record of. The estimates are pretty mind-blowing as to how many things have died on this planet over time. Hydrogen sulfide, yeah, it's a pretty nasty thing. I wouldn't be skeptical at all that it comes from organic matter, because it comes from organic matter all over the place, not just in the oil wells. Like I said, you can get it out of sewers, you can get it out of swamps. People who work in industries have special permits if they enter into enclosed spaces that might have been exposed to organic matter at some point, like a sewer system. You have to have special permits to enter in there in the first place, and special training on how to deal with an H2S exposure, because it's only very small amounts that can kill you. So it's just something I wanted to cover real quick, because this is actually stuff that isn't covered very well in school at all, which is appalling to me, as my background is in geology and in petroleum engineering. And sometimes you can forget, someone like me can forget, that my education was sought out. It's not something that they just teach in like your basic general courses for the most part. So yeah, I just wanted to address that, because it's something that I'm passionate about educating people on, and I think it's a fun question. Let's go. Oh, I have a couple other ones that were directed at me, and I'm just going to pull them up real quick. Okay, Andrew Gottridge says that he hopes I had a good day quail hunting last Friday. It was a good day quail hunting. I did a terrible job, but I didn't get very many. I got like 3 the whole day, so it wasn't that good, but it was really fun. So back to our usual questions. This one is kind of tongue-in-cheek, I think, from Chris Shattuck. This is directed to Sterling. It says, can we renew the discussion from yesterday about Elon being allowed to audit the Treasury? And if any of you guys watch In the Tank, which is the show that I host on Thursdays, same time as Climate Realism, it was a spicy conversation, let's say, between Sterling and Jim as to whether or not we should be letting private entity like Elon audit the Treasury. It was very fun to watch. So if you guys want to go back and watch that, yes. Sterling, what would you like to contribute to that?
I have nothing to contribute other than one of the auditors from Doge got canceled today, by the way, because of past tweets where he said some things that are considered pretty bad. And he was canceled, by the way, I think by X itself. So that just tells me once again, letting people, just random people that Elon Musk thinks are a good idea, go in there, maybe not a great idea.
We better move on before I get triggered again. Let's go.
Yeah, Jim's about to get triggered. Okay, I have a question from K1F8, who says, how much does the Heartland Institute receive from USAID?
It'd be great if it was any.
Yeah. And in fact, we receive so little from USAID that it's actually people who actively work to suppress our work who get funding from USAID.
That is the great irony. Yes, the USAID is a big scam. It's a scam for the left. It's a self-funding and influence machine. We are so far out of the loop, we don't even know it exists. But a lot of the groups that try to oppose us and have frankly tried to destroy the whole organization have received money from these sorts of things. And so I'm kind of enjoying watching them go down. We'll see.
If you look at the list of media groups that got all this money from USAID for subscriptions, right? These are people who about a decade ago said we're no longer going to interview climate skeptics. There's no balance. We're not going to interview them. So while they've been taking taxpayer money, they've been suppressing climate debate.
And you can subscribe to Climate Change Weekly, speaking of subscriptions, for free. It's not going to cost you $10,000 a year. You can get it for free. Go to heartland.org/subscribe.
There you go.
Awesome. Okay. And also, I wanted to apologize to the audience. My camera is super, super dark today. It's because my main computer and its little webcam are not working properly. So I'm using a tiny little tablet basically to do this, and its camera is terrible. So bear with me, you guys. If I look like I'm talking to you from a cave, I swear I'm not. Okay. Here's a question from Brian, who asks, is there anything being done politically to open up climate journalists to the other side of the argument?
Well, I think that there's nothing specifically being done because the government really doesn't interact with climate journals. The scientists that are paid by the government do. But I think what's going to be happening here is we're going to have an after effect of all the Doge stuff that's going on. And so some of the funding that's happening for some climate things are going to start, or they're already disappearing. especially some of the DEI, climate justice nonsense. And a lot of that crap has been submitted to journals. So that stuff is going to disappear. So the journals are going to find themselves hurting for money. And so they're going to have to be a little more open to start attracting more articles. And I would think that, we might actually have a good chance of getting a decent article published about climate in a scientific journal, in a couple of months.
Well,
maybe the same for newspapers. So maybe we should start trying to get into places like the New York Times and Los Angeles Times, things like that. I mean, it's funny, the LA Times did publish me on space exploration, but certainly not climate.
Well, they supposedly are opening that up now. Their new guy is getting he's becoming awake instead of woke, and that's how he's running his newspaper.
Yeah, so we should start submitting to them. Yeah, good thought.
I've already said that. The other way it might get into journals, skepticism might start to get into journals, is this. Most of the people who write for these journals are on government grants, right? They write these huge grant proposals. The EPA then gives them money, or NOAA gives them money, and then they write their article that then gets published. And they tell you, this was funded in part by money from, with those grants drying up for that, and possible grants being delivered to people who are a little bit more skeptical, you might see a shift in academia. At least a small shift. There might be a few more that say, hey, I'm willing to write a grant proposal to address real climate issues. And if they get funded, journals might publish their stuff because they're going to have to get it from somewhere.
Yep.
The world is changing with Trump.
Yep.
Can we
downstream benefit? Yeah, the downstream benefits of November 5th, I mean, we're only starting to even conceive them, but they seem much more real now.
Yeah, and as you shift public opinion, it'll be much harder for them to shift it back. So Trump has done a massive favor to the whole English-speaking world, and to some extent other countries too. But, in Canada, for example, we're seeing already people are now braver and outspoken. So yeah, he's done us a huge, huge favor. So the point is that the Conservative Party of Canada, follow suit.
All righty. Anthony, I'm going to pitch this one to you. This is from Wheelman, who says, please address the storm hitting southern Oregon. I guess they're getting pretty well covered in snow. I don't know if you're up to date on that or not. I'm certainly not. So,
well, yeah, it's basically pretty simple. It's another atmospheric river type system. We've had an atmospheric river off the western coast of the United States for the past week. And so far, for example, in Chico, California, 8.56 inches of rain so far for the month of February, and we're only a few days into it. So it's a good thing because it's filling up reservoirs and it's adding to the snowpack and so forth. But there's nothing unusual about it. We get these atmospheric rivers like this every couple of years. And, they've been going on since the beginning of weather.
all right. Thank you very much. I knew you'd have a good answer for that one. All right. This is from our frequent viewer, Bo Gus, who says, question, what? No mention of Jay Hansen saying green energy is causing warming? Thought that would be the lead when I heard about it this morning. I have not heard about this yet. I don't know if you guys have.
Hansen earlier in the week came out and said we're going to surpass 2 degrees. He admitted that part of the reason for that was cleaning up the exhaust from shipping. That's contributed to measured ocean warming. I haven't seen his thing saying green energy has done it, but he's become to some extent a gadfly and an apostate to the climate alarm movement, because he is much more. I mean, he's so far out there in the alarm spectrum that they say, no, don't believe that, because you really would give up and open a vein or jump off a bridge. We've got to have at least some hope. So I'm not surprised that he's said that, because he's one of these people that says, look, it's technology that's the problem. We got to go back to the Stone Age.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that we've had this huge spike in temperature over the last couple of years. It's shown up in all the data sets for temperature. And now it's going down. And I just sent a link to Andy, our producer, to bring up a graph on screen that I want to show everybody, because, what, as they say, what goes up must come down. And that's exactly what's happening. Here's from Dr. Roy Spencer, the UAH satellite-based temperature of the lower atmosphere. You can see the peak there just about 6 months ago. It was almost a whole degree centigrade, right? But now it's coming down. And that's what's happening. And the Earth is shedding its waste heat, and it's coming down. So, where's the crisis?
And that chart only goes back to 1979 either. It's you can't take any long-term on that. But if you're going to, cause a panic every warmest year ever, then you need to keep looking at those warmest years in the time frame that you think is important.
Rico Man saying that Trump's not helping his oil and gas stock portfolio. Tell him to back off. My friends in Midland are also complaining right now. Oil prices are going down and down, which is good for the consumer, not so good for the producer there. So that's pretty funny. I wanted to show that comment. Okay. This is from Chris Nisbet, who is also a frequent viewer of ours, who says, can somebody please ask Trump to impose tariffs on trading partners who are in the Paris Agreement? It might give some countries the excuse they're looking for to leave.
Brilliant. I love it.
Idea.
Well, yeah, and that would only cover, 199 countries on Earth?
And I'm trying to recall, Chris, I think he's from either South Africa or New Zealand. I don't recall exactly where, but I know Chris is one of our international viewers. So that's pretty funny.
I saw a story today that are related things. So the EU is, of course, has gone headlong into net zero, shutting down energy. They won't develop their own natural gas, but they'll have to. But they'll import it. They can do fracking, but they won't. And this story basically pointed out that they're going to have a problem with Trump because they're going to impose all these taxes, these border taxes, for climate reasons. And Trump could respond with tariffs in response to these climate taxes they're imposing on U.S. It's supposed to be every country, right? But they won't do it to China. But India's already complaining; it's biting them. And since India owns a lot of the legacy heavy industry there, right? Who owns? In point of fact, Jaguar, Rover, they're no longer English. They're owned by India, an Indian group. So if they impose climate taxes, climate tariffs on them, they do it on the airline industry and all these things. They want to avoid tariffs from Trump, but if they impose this on the U.S. industries, they're going to get them.
Okay. Robert Reed says, if climate change were real, how do they explain the Great Dust Bowl of 1930 to 1936? Wouldn't this be the norm? Almost 100 years have passed.
That question is structured so strangely. I don't quite know how to answer it. I mean, what would be the norm? The Dust Bowl? I'm not sure what you're saying there, but the Dust Bowl was a combination of two factors. It was a failure of agriculture to do proper soil conservation practices and a significant drought and temperature spike. It's true that we had a very dramatic series of weather events during the summers of 1934 and 1936, and they contributed to the Dust Bowl because there wasn't a good plan in place for protecting the soil, and so it blew all over the place. So those were the two things combined. But it just goes to show that the Dust Bowl period was one of those events that had nothing to do with carbon dioxide, and it had everything to do with the chaotic nature of weather. Weather can go from one extreme to the other, as everyone knows, and there's not one darn thing we can do about it.
Yeah, and climate always changes. In fact, scientists will say, yeah, of course there's climate change. The only constant about climate is change. It changes all the time. If it wasn't for climate change, I'd be sitting under 2 kilometers of ice right here. 25,000 years ago, that's what was the situation in Ottawa. And in fact, all of Canada, except for a small part of the Yukon, which was called a refugia because a lot of the animals escaped to this little area that didn't have ice. But the bottom line is that, yeah, climate changes all the time. Thank God it changes, or I couldn't live here.
So I would say, from my point of view, had climate not changed, I would have some nice beachfront property right now, likely. So you get the benefit, I get the cost.
Yeah.
But the Dust Bowl happened, and it happened at a time when temperatures were high, drought was widespread for a variety of factors. But it's interesting to note, since someone brought it up, more than half the states in the United States, or about half the states in the United States, set their highest temperatures ever in the 1930s.
Yeah. People should go to the...
Not 2010s, not 2020s, that are supposedly the warmest in history. No, the 1930s. In fact, there's like 1 year in the 1930s that set more records for heat than all the records for heat that have been set in the 21st century. So.
Yep. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Unfortunately, we went a little bit over. I didn't even notice how over we were until someone mentioned in our private chat that we need to wrap it up. So unfortunately, guys, we're going to have to end here, I think.
Yeah, we're going to end here. But there was a video that Anthony had shared that was should have been part of the segment on the infinite sea of rats. Yeah. And I thought we'd leave you with a smile.
Right. One of the things you can always count on the Washington Post to take something simple and exaggerate it beyond proportions of reality. And of course, their story about rats, being driven by climate change is one of the big things. Now, they'll probably go on to something else. I'm guessing that they're going to talk about the methane crisis next with cows, and then they'll move that to rats. Right?
Or the diarrhea crisis.
Yeah. And people really should go to the national... Oh.
Yes, rat farts are causing climate change.
Yeah.
See that severe weather right there? That was caused by rat farts.
That's right.
We should fade out. We should fade out with Michael Jackson's "Ben" in honor of the rats.
Yeah, and check out the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Extreme Weather Database, and you'll see 1936, 1936, 1936. We're not setting records now. It's all in the past.
Yes, sir. So thank you, Tom, for putting one last little climate fact on the Climate Realism Show, and for joining us today. You can find out more about Tom Harris and his fantastic organization, the International Climate Science Coalition. Very easy to Google and find, and check out his weekly podcast, what is it? Tell us where to go again.
The Other Side of the Story on AmericaOutloud.news.
AmericaOutloud.news. Thank you very much. Always visit climaterealism.com. Go to climateataglance.com for all the facts you need to counter climate alarmism. Go to What's Up With That every single day, because there's such great material on there as well. And always visit heartland.org, where you can not just check out our fantastic work on climate and energy and also donate to the Heartland Institute, but you can also subscribe for free to our weekly climate change weekly newsletter written by H. Sterling Burnett on this show. Thank you again, Tom. Thank you, Sterling. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Linnea. And thank you all for watching and listening for this week. We will see you again next Friday. Bye-bye.